Hello and welcome, one and all, to the first episode of the Quiet Palace Podcast's second season. After proposing a particularly interesting idea, I'm joined today by a good friend of mine. Rusty, my dear friend, I bestow upon you the honors of our introductory bit.
This is the Quiet Palace Podcast, where great legends prevail and evil wings to dust. Hopefully.
Today, we shall tread similar ground to that of the beginning. Of all of our playstyles that we could discuss, of all our advantages and disadvantages, theater of the mind in particular is a powerful tool that one can hold as a strong love for deep narration. Now, this is going to go a little differently than most episodes. We're going to freeball this a little bit. We have our introductory moment, but, we're just going to do it as we do, and hope that that's good with you guys. Yeah, so we'll start off. So, theater of the mind. It's a common playstyle for some folks. It's definitely one of my favorite options, considering that I've played in campaigns that you've DM'd with that, one-shots and all that sort of stuff, with that sort of playstyle in mind. So it's been an interesting ride so far, both the theater of the mind concept and other ones with visual aids and what have you. So we have advantages in both, and that's what we're about to dive into today. But yeah, so I kind of see it as like a substitute for that visual aid. You don't really have to use any tokens or markers, or you don't have to really write a map or design a dungeon visually to get the point across. You can kind of narrate that to your party and more or less just create something that's a little more diverse, a little more something that can be improvised.
Yeah, it's nice too because you don't have to have the full scene in mind when you start narrating.
Exactly.
And players are inquisitive. They'll ask questions about what's in the scene, right?
Mm.
And so, as those questions come up, you can clarify further.
Exactly. Yeah. Good way to put it. Yeah.
So, verbal, paintbrush.
Exactly. Which allows you to get a little more, I don't know, what's the best way to put it? Just innovative with things.
It's able to give you the broad strokes of the scene without too much prep beforehand.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that part of it all. Is that you can kind of pull some things from your mind as it stands, brainchildren as they are, and just create a unique experience off the top of your head, which you'd be quite surprised what you can come up with on the fly, considering what I've seen you do with that. I don't know, a couple of things that I've tried here and there. So yeah,
and that's honestly how I started out. Is theater of the mind. Like I was new to the hobby, and I didn't have a bunch of these fancy figurines, and but you have a general sense of distances and set pieces.
Yeah.
And you kind of go from there. I always found it went pretty smooth.
Yeah, and especially with some practice too. I've definitely seen your most recent work, which has been very fluid in how distance was measured and how that entire playstyle is brought to the most optimal instance that it can be. Like, considering what assets you have to play with, you're not using tokens, you're not using that clear guided path towards you with a bunch of squares that tell you, okay, you can move this many times.
Yeah.
You can kind of measure it outright. They're 45 feet away, then they're 45 feet away. You don't have to worry about moving diagonals and some ruling that can contribute to a higher cost of doing that. Maybe you could still do that with Theater of the Mind if you wanted to, just to put a cap on the distance if it ends up being a problem, but at the end of the day, I don't really see that as such.
Mm-hmm. It takes away some of the pressure of keeping track of those things a little bit.
Yeah.
You could have a general sense of, this creature, your target is, say 40 feet away from you.
Yeah.
Well, the players already know, what their speed is, what they can move in a round.
Mm.
And so, if you also know that, it's you can reasonably say, oh, you can reach your target in this turn.
Yeah, exactly.
Without having to worry about all the finer points of the squares.
Exactly.
And how exactly you're going to move around.
You can kind of describe that as you move along. Like, you're going to approach that person, they're that far away, and it's like I dash up to them, or I lunge with my rapier, or whatever you're going to do, right? Gives you that option to narrate further, or even narrate as the player a little bit to yourself, like describe more of your character's actions. It's just a clear path to.
And it also gives the freedom of the dice to allow a little more, have more control over the narration.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if they're, because I've had it where a friend of mine that was running, they would have us roll for almost everything.
Oh.
Like we knocked prone. She had us roll to stand up.
Yeah. Oh.
And it just really, I don't know, or maybe get it off.
No, that makes sense.
But you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
the dice can have an environmental impact as well.
exactly.
See, if you're running towards your target, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you roll really, really low, well, maybe there was something in the way.
Exactly, some sort of
And kind of
difficult
impeded
terrain.
you.
Yeah, so you have less movement now.
And all these things you don't have to plan in advance with either one.
Exactly, exactly. You can kind of just measure that as it stands and create circumstances as things go along, which is actually a really intriguing way to do that. I've never thought of doing it that way, to be honest with you. So, I mean, it really creates a different narrative. And I understand how some people don't like that, because some people can get really extreme with it, where you roll one on your attack or on that very movement over and you fall and you slam your face down. And realistically, you should have just been able to move that turn.
It can bog it down sometimes, I will admit.
But if the circumstances aren't that bad, like I know, for example, skill checks, if you roll a nat 1, it's not a crit fail like it would be an attack roll. At least in 5e terms, you would...
it's a more cumulative.
Exactly. You would just add your score, and if it's just a shit roll, then it's a... I've sworn. I've sworn. It's okay. If we miss with that shit roll...
If it's a low roll, right?
Yeah, then it is what it is, and you fail. So be it, Or you don't do as well. Maybe it takes a little longer, and like you said, the aforementioned difficult terrain, or just circumstances that didn't add to things. Maybe as you were shooting, like moving across to shoot somebody, your new position now provides a bit of cover for your enemy, and it creates a more difficult situation. So that can be an issue as well, and that might be a perception check that comes up. So I like that. I think that's a good highlight.
And not only that, like if you want to take it away from the dice, right, you can make those decisions on the fly as the end. Well,
exactly. You don't have to have the rolls that way. You can just kind of decide what to throw at your players. But the dice is a nice way to kind of be a guide and say, okay, maybe this time I'm going to give them that difficult terrain or what have you. In that case, I even treat a roll as more of a suggestion. And that's not to say that I look at the dice, I ignore the dice, and I do what I want. It's more, is this going to be like a game changer? Is this going to kill the party? Because if it for sure is, like, if I'm not trying to purposely be that sadistic to them or what have you, whatever, like, if you want to increase the difficulty, go for it. But if you want to give them a little slack, maybe that thing does happen, that deadly trap that they didn't see, but maybe it's not as deadly of a trap now. Maybe it's not just a bunch of spikes at the bottom of a hole. Maybe it's just a couple javelins that poke through a wall.
Right, and that's the other thing you can decide, right?
Yeah. You can kind of tone things down, because there are definitely some modules and pre-written content that we all know about. And
traps don't always have to be deadly to your HP.
Exactly. Sometimes
they can be very specific in their effects.
Yeah. Maybe you go to a treasure chest, you try to pull on the switch to let it open, whatever, the lever, what have you, and a cloud of gas comes out at you or something, and now you have a disease or you're poisoned or something like that, and then an encounter shortly happens after that, you're poisoned, you're going to have disadvantage on your attack rolls and such. So you can just provide debuffs or handicaps as opposed to just, here's 20 of your HP gone, and you have to rest to get it back, which in itself can be enough of a deterrent.
Which can be enough of a deterrent, that is true.
But it's nice to see a different perspective exploited as opposed to just your HP goes down. What if we messed with your stats, or what if we gave you a certain condition? What if we've done
Or what if
something
we trapped you in a scenario now that your party has to get you out?
Exactly.
Say, for example, there was a trapped stair.
Yeah.
A thin board that you step through.
Yeah.
And the spikes are pointed downward.
Ooh.
Now your foot's stuck.
Ooh.
And the rest of the party has to figure out, well, if we can't pull your foot out, you're going to lose the foot.
Exactly.
So now it becomes, how do we get it?
Yeah, how do we make this happen so we still have Buddy with both feet attached?
Without having him clumping around on stuff.
Exactly. And I mean, hey, if you got the right spells for it, maybe it isn't such a big deal. You rip it off, you put it back, and it's all good.
A little bit of presto changeo, rearrangeo, and you're golden.
Yeah, a little bit. If
Little.
mending works that way in your world, so be it. Maybe it can. I don't know. I've never thought about it like that. But
I don't think mending works on limbs, but hey.
Depends on, I don't know. I guess if you're a construct.
Depends what magic system you're running, right? Like,
True.
if you're right, a little more freeform with it.
Right. I mean, a corpse is an object, so,
I suppose it is, yeah.
Not that I like to think about it that way, but, that's...
I mean, at what point are you no longer a creature, right? Are you a creature if you're alive only? Or if you die, are you still a creature? Or are you just an object?
Because you were a creature, and now you're not alive, you're not animate, so I don't know. I guess it's really up for debate, isn't it?
It really is.
That's philosophical. I can't say philosophical. You get the point. It's a topic that I'm not...
Something they never covered in the rules.
Of course not. Why would they? But that's okay. That's the way it is sometimes.
Yeah.
So we got over what is theater of the mind. We kind of covered that idea. But what are the exact advantages? We've talked about the mental imagery that can come up that people can get immersed in. Painting a picture in their mind, giving them a full description of the room around them, really allows them to see the options before them. They're not just clouded by what they can physically perceive and what they may have to do a surprise perception roll to otherwise discover.
Right, exactly.
So you can give them the option to go, there's a dark corner with a crowbar, or it looks like a crowbar in the corner. I wonder what's going on there. I'll investigate and maybe see what's going on. Look around the room and go from there. There's just clear options, clear paths, as opposed to perhaps a grid with a little bit of a drawing on it. You can't quite see, it's a little subtle. I mean, it's enough to interact with, but your party may mistake that as just a mere detail of the map. And I mean, as long as you point that out, but then you're giving them the answers. So realistically, I see it as an advantage from the perspective of the theater of the mind to be able to present a more diverse room, more interactions that you describe to them without giving them the answers.
What I like about it is a lot of the time, I would say all the time, what you as a player are imagining based on descriptions from the DM is a lot cooler than necessarily whatever you can do on a grid.
Exactly.
And with your pieces. Like, those are cool, and
cool.
having them is cool.
Yeah.
But 9 times out of 10, what you're imagining in your head as you're hearing these descriptions of like this room, like everybody has their own interpretation of what that room looks like.
Exactly.
But it's the coolest thing they can imagine, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's all the same room.
Oh, yeah. Doors are still on the east side. They're still made of wood. But all those other details that have to do with...
are filled in by your specific brand of imagination.
Exactly. A painting of a beautiful woman, if you were that vague, would look different to some folks. So They might imagine the room entirely differently. If you ask different players to draw the room physically as they saw it as you describe it, you will get very different results. Though they will look similar, it's...
Yeah, if you narrate that to 4 different people and ask them to draw the room, you're going to get 4 different versions of that room.
Yeah. And if you are making a physical example just to accurately go by what the room actually looks like, not just someone's depiction, that's fine. But I like that idea. Because it's a more original experience. It's something that person can more actively recall based on the picture they've painted for themselves, which I think sticks with people more.
I would say so.
Yeah, so that's a good way to look at it, From there, yeah, as we talked about before, there's not really any map making to any of this. Not a lot you got to draw out, unless you really just maybe choice battles. I guess
supplemental, you can absolutely throw that in there a little bit.
If you really need it, if it's really important, if for sure they're coming up on it, obviously random encounters. That's going to make a lot of work, and it's going to bring us back to that visual problem again, where we're taking hours and hours to prepare.
Exactly. It takes away from the flow that theater of the mind provides, right? Like,
exactly.
You don't have to have all these resources at your disposal to keep the game running along.
Exactly. Keeps things more consistent. I like to think less preparation time. Really preparation time that you yourself dedicate, and that not everybody has to study immediately. Everyone's kind of at the same pace as how you describe it. It's a different concept for sure. But yeah, being drawn out to interact with the world more often. I think that's a point we made prior, and that's a point I like to bring up again for sure, just because it's that extra perspective. Maybe the slime that was dripping down the wall wasn't as apparent on the map and it might get ignored. Like I said before, you never know unless you want to point it out, but then at that point you're giving them the answers. So it's nice to narrate things that way. And in dungeons, I understand why you may have to make a visual example of that if you're drawing them out, but if you are not drawing this out, if you're specifically doing Theater of the Mind, that slime is just dripping down the corner. If they want to go and investigate that, there's a clear prompt for it. And I mean, a good DM will describe the essences of the map that are of important detail with a physical example, of course, that can further reinforce that, but you're still having to do that detail 2 times in a row, and in this case it just comes up for once. Yeah. So in that case, I guess it's a bit of a wash, but realistically I see it as an advantage. It's less preparation in total. But that's one of the many advantages among being able to, like we said before, very quickly improvise. Maybe Curse of Strahd's not going to happen this Tuesday, so we got to do something a little different tonight. And maybe we do a one-shot that has something to do with an adventure you've wanted to run, or just a little idea, or just something you've, again, completely pulled out of your butt.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's 90% of what I do as a DM is, like, off the cuff. Just, you're in a room.
Yeah.
This is kind of the room. And I might not know what the next room's going to be when I tell you this room.
Exactly. We are just spitballing, perchance.
Yeah.
You know?
And
I
that's
like
the
that
nice
idea.
thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
it can be whatever it has to be.
Exactly.
Without me having to take extra time to, okay, well, think about all this ahead of time. You know, details you might forget anyway.
Exactly.
So was it wasted effort? Sorry.
Yeah. Exactly. Well-placed descriptions. Definitely something that's important. Being able to narrate to your party what's going on. Of course, that does take a little bit of practice if you have something drawn up, or maybe you're even writing if you're running a pre-written adventure, and those details are already placed out for you, it'd probably make things a little easier. You just have to describe them how the book describes them. If there is no description, you go off the cuff, you do what you can, you improvise, but ideally if you can prepare well enough before the session, all the things that you will describe, like writing down building descriptions and such, it's a smoother process. You just kind of read through everything and everyone again is on the same page. Just kind of all links back into the other original points I had, or that we have, what have you. But for those that ask a lot of questions, and they're, quite the inquisitive and curious party members, for sure, we've had those moments. I think curiosity is a better thing than not. Sometimes it can be for the worse, but
Yeah, when a player wants to lick the wall, like, what do you say?
You say you lick the wall.
You lick the wall, and what comes may come.
Tastes like brick.
Tastes like brick.
Yeah.
When the brick doesn't taste like brick, that's when you run into problems.
The mysterious shard of dark evil that was the seed planted by some evil dark entity. Now, yeah, that tastes like ash. Well, I don't know what else I expected. I don't know where I am anymore. That's a fun story.
Oh, yeah.
Goes interesting places, does it not?
It does.
There are some setbacks with Theater of the Mind, as for any D&D strategy, really. Without a map, it can be challenging to keep exact track of distance, but with a little bit of practice and good mental imagery, you should be able to keep that placement in your head fairly well. As long as you know where the main standpoint is between your enemies and, of course, the party, you have the concept ahead of you that you'll be able to at least roughly judge the distance between these party members, to a point where you know whether or not your monk with 45 movement speed can get to the guy that's approximately 50 feet across the room. If you go diagonal with penalties, maybe this time he's able to just make it,
Yeah.
Depending on linking back, of course, to the whole distance idea.
Yeah, it can definitely be a lot more mental work.
Mm-hmm.
If you're really keen on, keeping the good sense of that distance, it definitely does take a lot more mental effort without having a visual aid.
Mm-hmm.
You got to keep track of a lot more pieces
Exactly.
at a time.
Because I guess you could have a little grid off the side of the sheet and do it like a battleship situation where you know exactly where they are and they have to ask you. And that's an idea, I suppose. But at that point, if you're already doing mapping, you might as well make the whole thing. And I don't know, I guess you could do it that smaller way, like the battleship way, like I mentioned. But I like the idea of just keeping that sense, that mental image, which again will take a little bit of practice, but once you get used to it, like you can just kind of fire it off now. I know in stories I play with, like play where you're DMing, the memory goes that enemies are a fair distance away. We get close, and I'm the same distance I was last turn. You usually you were good for not mixing it up. Like if I was 25 feet away, it's 25 feet away. I try to keep note of that too, just to be safe.
Yeah.
In case it was like, was it 20 or 25?
Well, and that's always helpful when the players are keeping track of their own distances as well.
Yeah. So it can require a little more concentration. So if it's a more beer and pretzels kind of game that's a lot more casual, laid back, and we're not really giving a fuck about the big picture and the minor details, yeah, I guess a grid would probably be a little better for that. But if you're doing Theater of the Mind, everyone's in and intrigued and focused, it's a lot easier to run it that way when people can remember how far they were away too. Just in case you forget, you could say, oh, actually I was 60. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it goes. Sometimes you need the cooperation of the players, and if you have good sports, that shouldn't be a bad idea. But again, cooperation, very important. As it stands realistically, but if you or your party have trouble with that, so be it. Maybe it's not the method for you, but at the end of the day, I like to think of it as a really suitable method for a lot of different folks, especially those that like to hear a grand story and really want to hear you talk about certain things or explain the lore behind the places they're journeying into, But yeah. But sometimes there can be too much detail. Sometimes there's a lot of extra note-taking and bookkeeping in a way that you think to yourself, okay, well this happened like 3 years ago in our time and 3 weeks ago in the campaign's time, so I really don't remember who this random individual was that we met that happens to be super important.
Yeah, that's the danger of Theater of the Mind, actually. Is when it's all kind of... Well, when you're mixing it too much with improv, right? Like, you could describe an entire room that you only expect the players to be in one time.
Yeah.
And, well, they may come back to that months, weeks from now.
Yeah.
And you might not remember what was in the room at all.
Exactly. And with some good note-taking, you can counter that to a decent degree. Writing down the details when they're fresh is the way I try to do it. I have a lot of campaign notes from just times past and games that you're in and games that other friends are in that I DM, a couple of different ones, what have you. Those notes help me a lot in the future because before I prepare for the next adventure, if I'm improvising certain pieces or I'm creating the story as I go, I know exactly what happened and what to remind them of if the players themselves forget about this important entity. Because those recaps and those what were you doing in your off time questions and moments for your character are an important way to keep a good track of all the things that you're currently involved in, more or less. What quests you have going on, what factions your friends or enemies with, or what people you've met that end up being important again and coming up in the future.
Yeah, and those are good ideas to bounce off your players as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because everyone has their own sense of what was important in the session, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to pad out your notes kind of thing, you can ask them like questions like, what was important to your character that happened this session?
Yeah.
What did you accomplish? What stood out to you? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Things like that can help pad out your notes so that when you write up your recaps, if you do that, you can include those important bits that kind of gives nod to each of the players.
Okay. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. So we have our disadvantages, but ways to, overcome them. And that was the most important part of really refining the strategy as it stands. Because there's something you could practice and get good at, but naturally there's going to be things that come up. And learning how to counter that is a whole other strategy in itself. So
yeah, it's an art form, really.
Exactly. And when I decided to talk about this concept, I could think of nobody better than my friend Rusty to expand further on this concept as what I understand as a master of Theater of the Mind, if I've ever seen one. So, in that case, I give all the credit for what experience I have in that regard to Rusty and what resources I've also learned from. Just over time, different YouTubers, different other DMs and their styles, and definitely yours for the very modular, I guess that's the right word, way that you run things where everything can be adaptable, everything can be
It's very freeform, yeah.
Exactly. And there's, the different campaigns that I like that you run where there are indeed some setbacks. Maybe first level spells give you a wild magic surge sometimes. And
I'm always tinkering around with
yeah.
magic systems and specifics. It's all happening in the same world, everything I run.
Right.
But different eras have different rules.
Exactly. Things can change over time. Maybe the gods of magic decide to do things differently, or what controlling forces there are over the arcane for this part of the universe or the world or what have you.
Are really unstable.
Exactly. Stable, or have to really decide to fuck with things in ways that we weren't expecting. We're definitely past the 10-minute mark. I'm giving you the F word. Forewarning. After warning. Oops. I'll put something in there.
I was thinking the other F word.
Yeah. But yeah. But we've covered our topic pretty well, I think.
I think so.
We've had our tea on the concept. We got some other things we gotta do today.
Get back some good thoughts.
Exactly. So I'm happy that I brought this lovely concept to you, my good people, hanging out wherever you are in the world. Maybe friends of mine, maybe friends that I haven't met yet. Guess we'll find out one day.
Friends from afar.
Indeed. Like yourself, my good friend. Yes. But thank you again for joining us. We hope that you have had fun with us discussing Theater of the Mind, and I hope that the future can return to us, our good friends, for one cup of tea and a riveting conversation about my favorite role-playing strategy game. Thank you for joining me today, Rusty.
Absolutely. I was glad to be on.
Glad to have you. And I hope we can do it again in the future. Get this little thing going again. We'll see what free time brings us, I suppose.
You can't see it from the audio medium, but
That was a fist bump.
that was a fist bump.
Yeah, the mortal taught me that one. He's a smart cookie. I've heard of this Riz concept that people have been talking about. You ever heard of that? Pull up with the Riz?
Something.
Apparently it is a man or woman of great grandeur.
Yes, without hat.
Without hat. No cap, indeed. Goodbye, my friends. Have a good week. We love you. I hope your existence has been a good one.
Okay, love you, bye.
Love you, bye.